Welcome to A Little Bit Radical, a business podcast from Standing on Giants. I'm Rob, your host. Join me as I meet people and organisations who are doing things differently, challenging the status quo and, yes, might just be a little bit radical.
We love snacks. In Britain, we have one of the most snack-obsessed populations on Earth. Recent studies have shown that over half of us snack 5 times a day. Now, there's nothing wrong with snacking per se, but when the only options are high-fat, high-sugar, our love affair with 11s can present a bit of a problem. Our guest today is Sara Roberts, founder and CEO of Healthy Nibbles. Healthy Nibbles are bringing change to the humble vending machine, allowing businesses and public spaces to take a break from crisps and chocolate and instead have a range of delicious and healthy snacking alternatives available at the press of a button. With a topic so close to my heart personally, I'm keen to get into this one. Sara, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Great intro, and I am so delighted to be here.
Thank you very much. So, if you are a little bit radical and you're on our podcast, so we know that you are, what do you think in your early life set you up for that?
I was thinking about this, and really I think my early life was potted with radical moments anyway. At a very young age, I moved to New Zealand. I think anybody that's moved, internationally, but also to a new school through an academic situation, you have to become resilient. It's a little bit of change, all sorts of things new that are going on, and you have to adapt. And then fast forward to being sort of 13, I had a serious bullying moment at school where I actually ended up leaving school. I was pushed in front of a truck.
Oh my goodness.
Quite awful. It was quite a sort of, obviously, tragic moment, interrupted the academic sort of flow that you go through. And I ended up in school just after being 13 because I just could not deal with that situation. And then I got sort of fast forward to sort of late teens almost. Well, it was late teens. I was 19 and got married on my 19th birthday. So I think those are quite, should we say, when you look at the world state, they're quite sort of little radical moments that were sort of potted through my early life that really formed, I think, certainly the resilience that I have today has come from those different experiences.
Goodness me, thank you for such a detailed answer. So you dealt with a lot in childhood. Do you think that, and you mentioned that you think that that really helps to build your resilience, but what was it like those years after you left school, after that horrible incident?
It was a little bit off the rails. I can't say it wasn't. I had a lot of resentment originally because I was a grade A student, and then being faced with a school that was not actually supportive of the incident. This is before the sort of what we know now, where if there is a bullying incident, it's sort of nipped in the bud really early and dealt with, because it's very heavily connected to mental health and all of those things that we are so much more familiar with and aware of in terms of how we deal with situations. So I think I went through frustration, resentment. My parents were sort of incredibly supportive and gave me that sort of, should we say, space to grow in my own little world. I did go off the rails quite substantially.
Can you give us an example of what off the rails means in that context?
Probably I'd stopped clubbing by the time I was 18.
Wow.
Yeah.
I think I started when I was 18.
Yeah, very, very different, I would say, for many children. Then I found various different aspects, ways of coping. I found an awesome lecturer actually at the local college who guided me through the basics GCSEs and got me into A-levels without having to go through all the rigmarole of doing my entire academic sort of exams beforehand. And that then catapulted me into university. So there were various different moments of going through what anybody does when you go through a traumatic experience. You have either fear or resentment, retaliation. Do you retaliate? I didn't. How do you cope with that? And then you move on to, well, how do I build from this? Because I can't change that. So you can't sit and be sorry for yourself indefinitely. So therefore we move on. So yeah, I think it kind of set the tone for how I deal with issues now. There's some things that are so far out of your control that you can't deal with, that you just have to take what you can deal with and what you can move on and create solutions.
You've obviously forged your own path in many respects and forced to at an early age, but then sounds like by choice you've started to forge your own path. How do you think about that bully now, looking back with hindsight?
More so with concern over their welfare at the time. What were they going through that they felt that it was necessary to inflict the level of trauma that they did on somebody else. Because I don't inherently believe that, I know we have some tragic media stories, but I don't inherently believe that 12, 13, 14-year-olds are growing up seeking to inflict damage on other people. Therefore, it's usually a catalyst earlier on, early years, or their difficult situations that have probably caused that in the first place. This was actually rooted in something so simple. I'd picked up a New Zealander accent when I lived over there, and it didn't fit with what they wanted, and it just escalated beyond that. So there must be lack of exposure to different culture situations, but also I expect trauma. So I don't have any resentment. I just feel that it forged me to who I am, but ultimately they must have been going through a lot.
So you're looking back with a lot of empathy, which I think is admirable for someone that inflicted, that kind of trauma on you. As you say, I'm interested in how, in you as a leader now, and the quality of empathy, that kind of radical empathy, little bit radical empathy that you're showing. Do you think it's important, as you are now the leader of a business and almost the leader of a movement in a way?
100%. In actual fact, last year we revisited the values in the business. I had just concluded the Goldman Sachs program for 10K small businesses, and really felt that, as many startups do, you sort of set your values with what you're initially thinking, but then things change, things evolve, things mature. And it got to a point where I felt to provide that sort of catalyst for growth and to bring the right people on board that can buy into that culture, we needed to review that. One of our values is to create a team that reflects humanity. For me, that is the empathy coming through. I want to create a safe space. So it doesn't matter if you've polar opposite views to me. It doesn't matter if you're completely different, culturally, religious, anything. It doesn't matter, because it's only through the amalgamation of all of these different intellectual and emotional values coming together that we're able to reflect the customers that we're dealing with and the environment that we're seeking to change. So I think in a very sort of long journey from that early years to now, there's definitely threads of that all the way through. And I am hugely committed to making sure the welfare of my team are good, that they're in a good place as much as you can possibly do. That has probably triggered from those early years events.
I think that's incredibly powerful. Thank you for sharing that. And I really like what you said there in challenging perhaps a kind of dominant story of what cultural fit might be, and that often ends up being kind of clones. So, this person's a cultural fit because they're the same as everyone. But actually what you've identified is very exciting, in that a cultural fit is values based, not demographic based or personality based or politically based or anything like that. And it sounds like that's been a very conscious decision.
Absolutely. I mean, relating it to personal life, I guess, getting married at an early age, and we're still together 30 years, we're coming up to 30 years being married.
Oh, I'm glad you said that, because I didn't want to assume. But fantastic. What a success story.
But we are a little bit radically different. We're completely different, actually. It's not a little bit different, just in terms of personality-wise. And I think that also opens your mind to what type of team you want to build. It's not about creating clones, because actually we joke as a family that if my husband was as ambitious as I am, our daughter probably would not be. So, it's just, or likewise, his relaxedness, would we be as aggressively focused on growth as we actually are as a business? So I think learning to navigate compromise, which is a word I would say in today's world is a massive no-no almost, that we're all in that environment where we're valid the way that we are and we don't compromise on anything. It doesn't mean compromising on your values. It means compromising on the solution that you're going to have, which is going back to that amalgamation of values. So I think, again, that feeds into a much more essentially mature outlook on how do we lead, how do we create this team that can bond together through a value, but not necessarily have the same outlook on life in general.
Do you work with your husband then? Is he involved in the business?
Absolutely. Yeah, we've worked together for 20 years.
Oh, wow.
And still married, so that's good. Hey, that's an achievement.
That is a little bit radical, I'd say, to be wedded, pardon the pun, to someone in both those aspects of your life. What's it like working with your life partner?
I would say you've got to know as a couple whether it's worth it. Oh, not whether it's worth it, whether it's doable. I've known couples that have been the destruction of the business. I've looked at different couples that have worked together, and the commonality that I've seen at the moment, and it could be subject to change in years' time, I don't know, but the commonality that I've seen is you take on board different roles that are non-competing. So what he does in the business is totally different. I would also say a respect for boundaries. He knows that I am the leader in the business. That's it. So there's not that sort of fight for ego element in there. And again, that comes, if we're going on the traditional norms, a man in the business having a female leader, especially when it's his wife, that could create tensions. I think I've learned a lot as well from different cultures. So I've lived as an adult in Africa for 10 years, and there's a lot of Indian families who work together. Like their entire family ecosystem will work and often live together. And looking at that, there is an element of who's responsible for what in different areas of their lives. And I think that's really, really key. And it's just having those open and honest conversations about if this is getting too much, then what will happen? And, you know, I mean, we don't formally do it. I have met a couple that actually formally sit down and say, if it was the business or the marriage, what would, you know, which blows my mind, because ultimately for me, family will always be number one. But yeah, I think compromising, making sure that you're doing different things is probably the tip. And make sure you feel compatible to do that.
Well, that sounds good to me. I know that me and my wife have had many conversations about how we could never work together, but we have a very strong marriage, but not sure we'd be great colleagues with each other. Both like being in the driving seat too much, I think.
Yeah.
So let's move on to your work now. Let's talk about Healthy Nibbles. Tell us the story of how you founded the business.
So I had just returned from Africa. My father was in a cancer ward. He was on his last few days of his life. And I was starving. It was 3 o'clock in the morning, and I went to a vending machine, and the usual culprits were in there. So your chocolates, biscuits, all of those things. Next to it was a poster saying diabetes and obesity kill. And putting it in context, my background pre this business was in brand and semiotics, so very much around the play of words and the use of words and meaning. And I just, in my mind, I thought eat this and die in that single moment. Slightly dark place to be, but then it wasn't exactly a joyful situation being in there. But I think then, because it was the nature of why we were there and the duration, I sort of ambled my way back through the palliative care and past the nurses who were eating heavily processed jam on toast. They were stacked with chocolates beyond. There was an entire corner of their office just literally rammed with chocolates from all the relatives and
Of course, there's presents for them, no doubt. People who brought
exactly.
chocolate to say thank you. Yeah,
absolutely, to say thank you. And it struck me in that moment that my dad's cancer was cause and effect, ultimately. This was a hospital environment which seemed to have no sense of what you eat and then what you are ultimately putting pressure on NHS and hospital environments and that connection. And then you see the nursing staff that are flat out. The moment my dad died, I believe it was either 2 or 3 people died within a minute on that ward. I mean, can you even imagine sort of having to go through that on your day-to-day work? I mean, obviously there's an element of it. That's why they're in their job, but it still must have an element of human emotion attached to that, I believe.
Of course, yeah.
And all of those things just seem to contradict what the sort of overarching message is, that actually we can look after ourselves, we can do damage limitation on our bodies, and ultimately then the economy, the healthcare system, through eating better. So it then fast forward a couple of years, because I wasn't in the mood for sort of starting a new business.
Understandable.
It took till then, and felt that really when I went back into it, had explored that market and that sector, there was nobody doing it and no interest to do that. So that's how our very first concept was simply put health food in a vending machine. It has evolved to what it is now, very different, but that was the catalytic moment that created the business.
Well, I'm immediately struck I feel like I'm with you there on that ward and that ridiculous juxtaposition of the vending machine and then the diabetes poster. And I think we know there's kind of that juxtaposition, as you kind of were saying, extends beyond, into the much wider system of health, because we know that so many hospitals are ultimately treating diet-related disease, aren't they? And then the idea that in the very hospital where you're receiving treatment, there's actually no options that would be part of a diet that would help you avoid diet-related disease kind of makes you feel so uncomfortable, doesn't it?
100%. And even now where healthier items, and I use that term so incredibly loosely, have made its way into the healthcare environment and businesses, there's so much disregard for actually doing, are they authentically healthy? Because ultimately, as you said in the introduction, we snack a ridiculous level within the UK. It's 97% of the population snack at least once a day.
So everyone, essentially, we're all at it. Yeah.
Yes, we're all snacking, and I think there's such heavily processing foods that are in that, shall we say, healthier label, and it really isn't. It's about taking yourself away certainly as a business owner, taking yourself away just from commercials to also impact. So if I'm recommending somebody should have product X instead of a chocolate bar, then at least make sure the macros are better than what you would have been consuming. And I'm still a massive advocate for not snacking snacking crazily. I still think, even though we deal with snacking and food on the go so in our day-to-day business, I'm still so committed to educating and supporting our clients and ultimately the employees to actually reduce your snacking, or if you are go for whole foods, carrots, apples, all of these sort of fruits, vegetables, proteins that are also widely available, eggs, inexpensive, easy to do. So many different items that you can be eating that aren't going to be having such a damaging effect on society at large, essentially.
What can talk us through our customer experience with a Healthy Nibbles vending machine? Where do I find it and what's inside? And how much do I have to pay to get my snack?
So we have now evolved into 4 different aspects of the business, and the vending machine element now sits within our automated retail. What that means is anything that is an automated cafe on the go experience. So sometimes it's vending, sometimes it's our larger cafes. They're all manless. We have up to 50 different types of products in a vending machine. And you will find anything from chickpeas to lentil crisps to biltong to flavoured waters, all sorts of different things. We have done a range of products in the machine itself. So we've actually created a round-pound one to make sure that there's as much into the health equity that we can do as a scale-up. We're not profitable just yet, so we can't give away the food as much as we'd like to. So we try to make it as inexpensive as possible, but equally so, we've got a very luxury one that has a more high-end range. And it suits different audiences, and that's very much what we're about. I think in terms of the experience, we are so different. You've got full nutritional and allergen information before you make a purchase, and you can search via your dietary preference. So if you're 14 allergen safe, plant-based, nut-free, press the touch screen, and it gives you a list of everything that's suitable for you.
Oh, that's fantastic. People must love that, those who do have intolerances, etc., or people who are avoiding a particular thing.
Absolutely. And I think with the rise of Natasha's Law a few years ago, having that transparency, particularly when we're in on-the-go environments, people with allergies want accessible snacks and food, but they are always on alert in terms of what's actually in the product. We've got a brilliant system that we can actually shut all machines down in under 30 seconds. So if there's any form of product contamination, it can be locked and no purchases can be made. We've also got a disability or a wheelchair user function where you can press the wheelchair icon and it lowers the eye level and raises as delivery bin on taking out that item from the machine. So I think we're making tweaks and adjustments all the time as we go along to make it more inclusive, to make it more accessible, to make it suit the most amount of people that we can do. And then the cafes are really just an extension of that. So instead of just having ambient food, we've got fresh, frozen, The frozen is brilliant because it actually reduces on the food waste that happens in businesses. So 40% of the food waste comes from UK businesses. By having frozen meals that can be flash heated or flash microwaved, we're actually eliminating that food waste that typically comes from fresh in a workplace as well.
That's fantastic. So as I understand, this is your, I believe, do you call them well-being hubs, these cafes? Yeah.
It is, yes.
So these kind of unmanned cafes that are kind of placed into your office building, right? And then you can go in and then you've got all these options, fresh frozen snacks. But I understand you do quite a lot more with those businesses, as well as providing the food and providing the environment. You help them with education around healthy eating and productivity and that kind of thing. Could you tell us more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, part of this journey is education. We have got, as we've discussed, a broken system at the moment with the impact of obesity, diabetes, health-related issues. We've also got a broken system as far as food waste and sustainability. And I think people do need to know in a caring and sort of loving and concerning way that the impact of poor health choices on their life. One thing that did come out of this sort of catalyst with my dad is you can't go with the doom and gloom. It's not a well-received message, but it's a cause and effect situation, and you don't want to wait till you're in a hospital ward to realise that you could have made those changes years ago. So it's very much about engaging with the employees, because there's all these different dynamics that also affect what we actually eat. Have you slept the night before? I know that the first thing I want in the morning is sweet-based, chocolate-based chocolate. If I've not slept, it's comfort. It's something in those chemicals that you just want. I want comfort food. So sleep is a huge contributor to the food choices we make. Exercise, getting out in the open, and it is becoming more accessible that it's just go out and move your body rather than go spend 3 hours in the gym. That message is getting out there. I also think that stress and mental health, and this is a very delicate area because there are quite a lot of mental health issues that can be controlled and supported and actually removed through diet. Now, that's not to belittle the people that have got some serious issues that need working through and dealing with, and that is for the medical side, but where it is something that we can control, if you're constantly eating ultra-high processed foods, it has a medical impact on mental health. So I think it's about bringing all of those different things, so the sleep, the movement, and the mental health, into that dynamic. And it's also about availability. Ultimately, being able to access the right products at the right time, at the right price point, is ultimately how we are going to change people's behaviour. It's quite a well-rounded package.
Absolutely. Yeah, so much in there. The anecdote that I immediately think of is the best way to get people to recycle is to take away black bins. If the only option is a recycling bin, then people will use it and put things in the right place rather than using the black bin. One of my personal favourite drums that I like to bang is about the potential well-being windfall that's there for employers that properly prioritise their employees' well-being. And usually I'm talking about that in terms of mental health and stress and burnout. And I'd not really thought about it in terms of diet before. But can you tell us a little bit more about the potential impact of your employees, as you say, in a holistic way? If you can support your employees getting good sleep, eating well and nutritional food, as well as managing workloads so that they're not burning out, what's the potential uptick there? Is there any research on that kind of thing?
It is potted, but there are definitely, we've got a really brilliant statistic that if you eat something unhealthy, your productivity falls by 66% for the next 45 minutes.
66%?
For 45 minutes.
Oh my God.
So
2/3.
Yeah. Then correlate that with how many snacks you have if it is consistently unhealthy. That's quite staggering. But even just taking that single moment, your 11s is you choose to have something unhealthy. What we've been able to do is look at that 66% against a sort of £25,000 salary, and we're saving close to £2,000 per annum per employee that we can get to change one snacking moment a day to healthy. So that is a huge, huge uplift in terms of financial impact on the business itself and a motivator for the business. I think the other aspect is when we're looking at that supportive environment for employees, one of the questions, and it actually recently has come up around, I didn't want to put one of these hubs in because I'm sending the message that I expect my employees to stay in the office.
Yeah, stay there for dinner, not leave at lunchtime, like that kind of thing. Right, okay, yeah.
I countered that with, actually what you're doing is providing ease of accessibility that doesn't have the queue system that a major retailer would potentially have at a lunchtime break. And then you're therefore giving them possibly an extra 10 minutes out of a queue system to go and enjoy more downtime, more relaxed time, more sort of recouping over that lunchtime break. I think you can turn anything on its head in terms of that positive impact, but I think really health and well-being needs to be a strategic imperative in every business if you are expecting the best out of your team. It's an always-on environment. We don't seem to get a minute. Anybody doesn't seem to get a minute to reflect, adjust, catch up with work, to have that downtime, to catch up with friends, to meet the demands of family. What are all of those different things? And whereas I'm very much about building a high-performance team, it's about doing a high-performance team safely. And I think that is something that needs to be reflected in businesses now.
Absolutely. Health and well-being as a strategic imperative. That's the soundbite, I think. Sara, I absolutely love that. If I'm a business owner or leader who wants to start on this journey of supporting my team's well-being, but perhaps I don't have a fixed office, I'm a hybrid or a remote company, or maybe I do have an office, what's the first step, would you say? What do you recommend as the first step to supporting your team on this wellness journey?
I believe ultimately it comes from a leadership goal to actually be committed to health and wellness of your team. I think as with anything, and it's the same on the sustainability journey, and we're a B Corp, so we've been through that, it's what can you control at the moment? You can't do everything. You're not going to have a fully running program that addresses every area. I would say stop wasting money on tick box exercises. Getting a masseuse in once a week, great if it's part of a holistic strategy, but it's not going to fix everything. Look at the thing. And actually going back to the 4 pillars we tend to talk about, whether you use us or anybody else, those are the 4 pillars that you need to be looking at. How to support your staff on sleep, health, mental health, movement, and nutrition. So look at the changes. It could be you don't get bacon butties in if you're in the office. You swap it for some healthier alternative. If you've got remote teams, sending snack boxes to them that are healthier. That's a token gesture, but it's a way. But I think ultimately it needs to get into the thinking behind the business, shall we say, because it's through that thinking and through it being embedded in the culture that then these touch points, which I feel that even as Healthy Nibbles, that's what we are. We're a health touch point. It's how they come and piece together, and you'll find different things work for different people. So if you're fully remote and based around the world, then it isn't carbon efficient to be sending boxes all over the world, snack boxes. But what can you do locally? Can you gift tokens? Can you do webinars? Ask your team what they want as well. Too often we go in with that sort of, oh, everybody's done this and we should do this. But it might not work for your team. There might be a different age group. There might be a different type of character. They might not want anything. Unlikely, but it's really getting to grips with your team. If you're an earlier stage like us, it's saying, right, we're going to make this part of our culture and this is what we can do at this moment. And you'll never be able to do everything, but you can always make progression and inroads into these different areas.
Yeah, so start where you can and just start. I think that's a recurring theme with many of our guests and many of the initiatives that we talk about. Whatever area of business it might be in, just start, but with some thought, ultimately do the thinking. So I want to bring us out of your day-to-day now and look more at the world at large. And what's a little bit of a radical change that maybe you can't influence that you would like to see happen out there in the world?
I would absolutely love to see government, academia, healthcare, education and businesses come together to solve the food issue that is out there. The ultra-high processed foods that are essentially killing people in droves. And I would love to see that changed. Way out of my control.
So collaboration. Collaboration on a mass scale. Yeah.
On a mass scale, but take your head out of just the budgets. And, as a business, we're saying we're going to be profitable, we're going to be impactful. And I think you can be both. It just takes a bit more thought. And arguably some of the larger food companies, they've got more wheels turning and things happening and cogs that they've got to deal with. But at the same time, we can't do this to the detriment of life on Earth. And it ultimately is. It's not just the individual, it's also how is it affecting the planet. I'm very early stage into a book by Henry Dimbleby called Ravenous.
Oh, yeah.
And it's about the food system. And there was one graph that just showed how the population's grown, but how food production has grown. And it's way over what we actually need.
Yeah.
And you could reduce the amount that you're producing, still feed the planet and the people in it, and do so without impacting life. Yeah, that's what I would like to change.
It's very in line with both our companies are B Corps. We've mentioned it briefly, and I get told off for going on too much about B Corp on this podcast. We'd like to talk about other things. But ultimately, they're just that simple idea that profit, but not in the pursuit of profit for its own sake and shareholder enrichment, but profit in the pursuit of better outcomes for people and planet. I think it's a misquote from Winston Churchill. He was talking about theatre, and during the wars, it's like, should we need to close the theatres? Then he said, well, what are we fighting for? And I kind of feel like that about all these things like oil and, well, we can't tackle oil because of, we need the profits and blah, blah, blah. And food, we can't change ultra-processed food because, the economic growth. And it's like, well, what is the economic growth for if there's nothing left?
Absolutely. I tend to find the smaller brands, we're committed to working with smaller brands. So 60% of our brands are from minority founders, which is incredibly enlightening. And I just really love that.
Great job. Yeah.
That work that they're doing. But arguably, they're the ones that are creating the products that are less processed, that are using cleaner ingredients. But arguably, they're also the ones that are less funded. The entire funding ecosystem is not necessarily recognizing that genuine impact that they're having, that sort of is a bounced catalyst, essentially. So you support them and they can grow and they can support other people. It's only until we get the price point to a reasonable amount that we can then support initiatives into health equity and lower economic groups, which ultimately we need to do a sort of catch-all situation. And the only way that that is going to change is through collaboration, but a genuineness. And I am constantly disappointed actually by the amount of people that will profess to do something, and then whether it's the media uncovers it or somebody else investigations uncover that they're actually financially aligned, politically, whatever it may be, and you just think, actually, can we just scrap all of this because this is about humanity? And you've got people like David Attenborough, people like Henry Dimbleby, people all over the world speaking about how we're destroying people and planet, but we're ambling along thinking it's okay. And we don't always get it right. And you'll know if you've been through that B Corp journey. I'm quite certain we don't always get it right. And I'm not saying we do. But if you don't start somewhere and you don't start making an impact on these things, you're never, ever going to make an impact. And there's a lot of great people out there talking about individual elements. At the moment, I do tend to feel it's very isolated into individuals and into individuals' passions, rather than a joined up thinking that spans an entire sector. And then the offshoots of that, because actually, if we brought back food education in a proper structured and engaged way in early years at school, taught them how to grow and to plant and to cook, all of that sort of circular element of actually, this is what you're eating. This is how to create food. I've been in places where we've had very, very low budgets on food, and arguably on the wealthier side. And those earlier situations don't really leave you. You should be able, definitely cook meals for well under what you can go get something fast food out there. So I think it's, there's all of these different ways that we can actually make a change.
It brings us back to your first point of the collaboration needed and the sense of collective responsibility and endeavour throughout all the kind of systems in our society. Well, I'm on board, Sarah, even though we've got some work to do.
Brilliant.
I'm on board. So we're coming to the end of our time now. You've been a fantastic guest. Thank you so much for everything you've shared. We always like to ask this same question at the end, which is, if there's someone listening, and people do listen to this podcast now, which is exciting. If there's someone listening who has a little bit of a radical idea for their work, for their personal life, whatever it might be, what advice would you give them to get started?
I'm a firm believer in writing things down, but I'm a pen and paper kind of girl. Write things down and see what you can do immediately. I think there's two things that I've learned in this journey. One is, if you can't fully do whatever you want to do, then fall in that direction. Do something that moves you. It's not budget related, it's attitude. It comes from the heart. So do what you can do with what you've got. I think connecting yourself to other people and just connecting into that ecosystem is just so key as well, into whatever you're trying to do. And then just get started. Get a move on.
Get a move on. Time is short. I love it. I personally love fall in the right direction. I love that. And if I look at my own life, fallen in the right direction a few times as well. Well, Sara, thank you so much for appearing on A Little Bit Radical. You've been a wonderful guest, and wish you every success as Healthy Nibbles continues to grow.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. If you enjoyed it, please follow us on your podcast platform. If you'd like to appear on A Little Bit Radical, or have an idea of someone we should speak to, please email podcast@standingongiants.com, or get in touch with me on LinkedIn. You can search Rob Fawkes or search Standing on Giants and you'll find me there. Thank you very much, and speak to you next time.